there's layer upon layer of consequences to your actions, be they attempting to be positive and reduce emissions, or change the way you go about things, or change the way that you treat patients. And so at the end of what we do is a person who will get better or not. That can take a variety of different pathways to achieve that. So not only do we need to understand, well, here's the impact of the thing that we do to the patient, but here's the consequences of that, and here's the carbon emissions from that actual result. There's a few unintended consequences that have happened already, in fact, in the world of healthcare, when we've tried to do something better, with the lowest hanging fruit, and possibly you've just undone the thing that was good and made it worse again. And this is the tricky stuff when it comes to healthcare.
Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. I am Joachim, and the podcast is hosted by Green Innovation Group. We are a management consulting company working with pharma, MedTech, and healthcare. And today I have a real treat for you. We have Michelle Sullivan in the studio, and she is a seasoned MedTech professional working with health economics, market access, but even more importantly, sustainability. And she takes us through her journey, how that just a couple of years ago became really important to her, and how it's working out with the tenders in the markets, how the industry is collaborating, and what are the challenges. It was an absolutely joyful conversation to have with her. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Michelle, welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. I've been super excited about having you. You have a wonderful energy and passion about sustainability and a wealth of experience from the MedTech sector. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, of course I can. So my name's Michelle Sullivan. I've been working in the world of medical devices for over 20 years. I head up a public affairs department for a large global healthcare organization that make medical devices. And I've I call myself an accidental eco-warrior, because I stumbled into this world by accident, and now it's a bit of an obsession stroke moral imperative. And I spend a lot of my free time in particular trying to raise awareness, putting different posts on LinkedIn to make people think about things. And I also spend a lot of time going out and about presenting. I think I worked out last year I presented to about 2,000 people over the year, talking about how in the world of healthcare, emissions are so large, the sorts of things we're going to have to do to sort it out, the difficulties that exist with regards to doing that, and just trying to get people to be galvanized and understand the importance and really how speedily we're going to have to do something about this. So that's my background. I'm not an expert. I've created an expertise from out of nothing, really, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's but I think that's often where the expertise comes, right? That you sort of take these two circles and put them on top of each other, and in that Venn diagram that of sustainability and MedTech, you're obviously very knowledgeable. And yeah, wow! With all the presentations, I had no idea you would doing that as well. As you mentioned as well, that you're here as a private person, but obviously working as a professional in the MedTech industry. And you said you were an accidental eco-warrior, which I think is true for many of us. Could you take us through that accident? And so what happened in your life that tuned you into that, wow, this is important, I need to do something?
Well, the first thing that happened was a while ago, whereby my son set up a charity in 2018 which was called Green 18, and he did a lot of work out and about doing practical things in the environment to try and clean it up, educating school children and various things like that. And he seconded me a little bit with some of it and started me thinking about it. But it wasn't until I'd been asked by one of my company's customers what the company was doing in the world of environmental sustainability, and I went away to find out what was happening, and then got involved in various groups where what happened was I realized I didn't know what they were talking about. They were using terms that I didn't know what they meant, and they were referring to things that I wasn't really clear what specifically they were talking about, but also the context and all sorts of things around that I wanted to understand so that I was a proper part of the conversation. A lot of those people were engineers, and they were talking about things like scope 1, 2, and 3, which, having been in this world now for a few years, I it's like, well, of course I know what scope 1, 2, and 3 is, but I did a talk to 300 health economists last year, and I asked them to put their hands up at the beginning of the talk, and I said, who knows what scope 1, 2, and 3 is? And 3 of them put their hand up, right? And this is what we're dealing with here. It's like a sort of a gobbledygook language and a forward problem that we have to get really good about communicating in the here and now. And so I went off and did a course with Cambridge University, the Institute of Sustainability Leadership. And that was, to be honest with you, that was really the start of it. For me, that was the start of the moral imperative. That was where I realized, oh my goodness, there's really a big problem, and it's going to require a lot of people contributing to this over a very short space of time to really make a big enough difference.
Yeah, I have so many cool things about that story. I mean, first of all, amazing that life-changing event led you to take action and really go full in, which is quite obvious. But also that I love that it came from a professional need and an ask towards the MedTech company that you're working in, and especially since you're working in a commercial position with market access as well, because I think that's a reality that a lot of especially leadership, perhaps, and perhaps especially commercial organizations around in the medtech companies are not tuned into, that we need to be conversational around sustainability. Our salespeople, our market access people need to be conversational. We need to know where to go internally to be able to answer these questions, just if we want to keep doing business.
Absolutely. And the first thing that you must do is get to a point where you know what people are talking about. And then the second thing that you can do off the back of that is really understand the urgency and the size of the problem, and then realize, okay, well, I'm a parent, or there's pretty much nobody on the planet who hasn't got a relative who's younger than them that they wouldn't want to leave something in a habitable and decent state for them. I'm in my mid 50s now, I don't mind saying, and I'm concerned that by the time my children are my age, things will be really quite difficult for them. And all of the advantages and the certainty that exists for me in my headspace, like, what's happening with my pension, how I'm going to be provided for in old age, what the actual society that I live in will be like, all of these different things, there is no certainty when you start to unpick it and realize what could happen. And I would like to do something about that and feel that I've contributed to an improved scenario for any of my younger relatives, friends, neighbours, anyone really, I suppose. But everyone can focus in on somebody that they love and care about as to why they would do something in this space, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think there's an enormous potential in the people in the healthcare industry, because most of the people who work in the healthcare industry are very value driven and chose that over other options because they like to contribute. They like to give something back to other people than themselves. And I just think that for a long time, sustainability, environmental sustainability, have sort of been left out of that scope. That, hey, we're saving lives, so I mean, we don't really need to look at that. And as you said, the reality is that the healthcare industry would be the fifth largest CO2 emitter if it were a country. So we can't really do the green transition without the healthcare industry. You're in the interesting position of working with market access and the commercial aspects. So, which I think is wonderful, because it's absolutely key to bring it out there and for the private companies to start making business sense of this. Could you give our listeners a view of what's the landscape out there? What's the reality?
What's the reality of market access and how it links in with?
Yeah, with sustainability and the I mean, you're working in the UK is from procurement departments and buyers and payers. Is it something that's coming up, sustainability?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, it's right at the front and center, actually. And, one of the other reasons I'm so immersed in this is because I do live and work in the UK. And as a result, the NHS is the world's first health system to commit to net zero. And they're making requirements and tender requirements and legislation and questions in all of the different documents that come through, all of which are asking us difficult things that somebody's going to have to answer, and where you need to have collated information in order to answer it, and also where you're going to have to be doing things, practical things that are demonstrating your positive intent in this way. And so there is an interesting conundrum with healthcare, and you've alluded to it a little bit, where you've said, oh, well, we're looking after people and we're making them better, so we don't need to worry about that. And I call this topic, and lots of people that know me have heard me say this many times, the world's biggest onion, because there's layer upon layer of consequences to your actions, be they attempting to be positive and reduce emissions, or change the way you go about things, or change the way that you treat patients. And so at the end of what we do is a person who will get better or not, and who will have something done to them that improves their health. And that can take a variety of different pathways to achieve that. And so not only do we need to understand, well, here's the impact of the thing that we do to the patient, but here's the consequences of that, and here's the carbon emissions from that actual result. And all of those things all tie in together. And whenever I listen to what people are asking us to do, I don't feel like we've got it pinned down exactly. Where does this start and finish? Where does this life cycle analysis, right, of what we're doing per patient start and finish? And there's a few unintended consequences that have happened already, in fact, in the world of healthcare, when we've tried to do something better, with the lowest hanging fruit. For example, inhalers for asthma. And yet, if you then change that for something that the patient can't use as well, then the outcome starts to get worse, and then the impact on the healthcare system for that patient starts to get bigger, and possibly you've just undone the thing that was good and made it worse again. And this is the tricky stuff when it comes to healthcare. You've got to look at it in a holistic manner, and yet not use that as an excuse to do nothing, because we've got to do things that are going to improve the situation. So,
Definitely.
there's maybe some low-hanging fruit that don't directly impact the patient, but that are how companies go about their business. That would be the best way to start.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, we always have to work within the realm of safety and efficiency for the patient, but at the same time, we have 8 to 10 million people dying of air pollution each year, and we have starting to get resistant to antibiotics because they're being spilled in rivers or overused in agriculture and whatnot. So there's a conundrum there. And thankfully, there's some wonderful cases coming up from the healthcare systems and also from the private companies in production and supply chains and whatnot. And as someone not coming from the UK but working in this industry, I don't think it can be overestimated how important it is that NHS has set these net zero targets. Because when I'm talking to the leadership in the multinationals, and you're working for one, there are very similar movements in Scandinavia, for instance, and they have followed closely after. But those markets are also small enough to ignore, whereas you can't really ignore NHS. I mean, no country can afford that on their balance sheet. So therefore, it's such a huge driver, so living in that world or working in that market where these requirements are starting to be set. You're working with market access. Could you talk us through what needs to change compared to maybe how you worked from 2 years ago to adapt into this new reality of sustainability being a parameter?
Yes, well, it's a good question, and one of the reasons that I stood in front of a room full of health economists last year, because that's my training is in health economics. What made me start to understand how this might work in a patient pathway and looking at the emissions from treating the patient in that whole pathway, as you do with health economics, you look for the value, right? And I just substituted pounds for kilograms or tons of CO2 emissions in my calculations to work out what was going on. But the reason I stood in front of these health economists was because the way that we currently value, if you like, is a health economist will look at outcomes over the cost. And yet there's another cost, the cost to the environment, or the cost in carbon of what we're doing to any individual patient, which contributes to the whole dynamic of how this impacts the population. And so my suggestion, and it'll be an ongoing piece of work that I'm doing with some other colleagues as well in other companies, is that we need to start thinking about using another. So if you've got your x-axis and your y-axis with cost and outcome, you'd stick a z-axis in, and it would be impact to the environment of that thing that you're doing, and that would then truly account for that whole impact positively and negatively, and allow you to compare it with other treatments, as NICE, for example, does now. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, they will compare things in that way to decide, in a fixed amount of money that you've got in a healthcare system, what's the biggest healthcare bang for your buck you can get, right? And so I have to say that we're not close to doing that yet. The z-axis piece doesn't yet exist. Will it exist? Definitely. I think everybody found it a little bit hard to take in, and it goes back to our earlier conversation, which is you've got to understand the basics in order to then start being an expert in your sphere in what you do. So you said I'm a market access expert. I'm a health economics person that understands I can look through the spectacles of health economics. And now I look through the spectacles of health economics and environmental sustainability when I'm looking at any individual problem or situation or healthcare solution. And I try to unpick the best way forward and then be able to prove and demonstrate that to a customer or to a patient or to anybody out there in the world of healthcare who's procuring goods, for example. And one of the groups that I did work with last year was some of the procurement organisations in the NHS. You know, they did want to upskill their individuals to understand why this is important and the sorts of things that needed to be considered if you're going to work in a world of MedTech. And so, you know, there's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of willingness to do the right thing. But I think we have to keep forcing that collaboration and those lines of communication to avoid all of the unintended consequences, whilst not using them as excuses to sit on the fence, you know, because we could all come up with reasons why this is difficult to do. We can all come up with reasons why our whole setup isn't set up to do this, right? Because it isn't, because nobody's working for companies that set up a business to be environmentally sustainable in the world of medical devices. You know, they set up a business to improve patient lives and give them cures and make them better and do it in a safe and effective way.
Yeah, and it's we've done some work around integrating sustainability and LCAs into health economics and value-based healthcare, and it's definitely needed to get into sustainability into those spreadsheets and decisions. I highly agree on that. If you take a standard hospital, something like 85% of the CO2 emissions will come from scope 3. So that basically translates into consumption, and that basically it means a lot of things, but among other things, it means MedTech products, like the company you work for and others are producing. And the clinical personnel, they can't really get the new products that are needed because they don't exist yet. And you can't just develop them in a vacuum because they have to fit into the care pathways and so on. So it's absolutely crucial that those forums and dialogues start developing. How do you see that hen and egg problem, so to speak?
Yeah, I work with our industry body. I'm the chair of the sustainability group with the ABHI, and everybody that works in that group from all the different companies, everyone is very collaborative and supportive and want to make a difference. That is for sure. I think that the difficulty comes when we have to start to look at how we've all traditionally done business, you know, and we've all traditionally done business in a competitive environment. We're trying to take market share. We're trying to be the company that treats the most patients in this particular way. And we don't particularly see our competitor companies as anything other than competitors. But yet, in the world of environmental sustainability, when you start to look at the practical things that you can do to move from a linear economy to a circular economy, for example, to stop, you know, making things and then disposing of them, and then making some more things and then disposing of them once they've treated a patient, then you have to appreciate that we're not going to be able to do that in isolation. All 10,000 companies or whatever can't put in 1,000 different recycling bins into hospital A. That's not going to work, right? So, and likewise, we all need to drive regulation and improvements in that world that are necessary for us to make the difference that we can in the lower hanging fruit that aren't even things like what procedure are you doing and what a device are you using. There are things like, what have you packaged your goods in? What is the situation with the instructions for use, for example? So in Europe, we still need to have paper instructions for use because of regulation and legislation. Whereas in the States, you don't need to have that. You can just have it electronic. And this is a decent proportion of the weight of the goods that are shipped around, and therefore a decent proportion of the energy used to ship those goods around the world. And they open the box up to take the device out and chuck all the rest of it in the bin,
Yeah, that's literally how it happens. Like 9 out of 10 times or even more is just the papers are pulled out and thrown in the bin. And
they don't want it. We don't want it. Nobody needs it for the instructions, but the instructions are there in case somebody needs the instruction, right? And so having that digitally for someone in an operating room doesn't seem like a crazy idea. And that's the sort of stuff that we're all working together to drive through via MedTech Europe and the ABHI and the MHRA, and all of these different organizations are all communicating and collaborating together to try and change these things that would be the easiest things to change at this point.
Yeah, because that's also like one of the challenges or concerns I'm hearing from when I'm working with commercial leadership in MedTech is that, well, they agree that sustainability taking space in tenders is a good thing in general, and it's fine with the regulation coming and whatnot, but there's a concern that the way that sustainability is implemented into tenders will either skewed to make someone favorite, or it will not be a good fit with the data that's available, or not be uniform, and all these kind of concerns, which of course are valid concerns. But the short answer is probably also that the only way to get influence on how these processes are set up is to engage. I mean, if you're just sitting back and waiting, then. But how do you is that a concern you're seeing among commercial leadership as well? And what are your thoughts on that spectrum of integrating sustainability into tenders?
Well, I think that first of all, let not perfection be the enemy of good, right?
Yes.
And that is the case for all the things we've talked about so far, whether it's the life cycle analysis or how we're all answering our tenders, or what we're being asked being fair, or all of the things that could crop up. What I do see is a really good attempt to try to make things fair. Requests to have things that are published and available on our websites. It seems like a decent way of trying to filter out people that just make it up and people are actually doing it, right? You could be held accountable in that way. It makes work for everybody, but you can't have everything. So, that seems like a reasonable thing to do. What I do see is that there's this moment in time that everyone needs to upskill, and so that they really understand what they're asking and what they're being told. And that also includes in med device companies, as well as the people writing the tenders, marking the tenders, working in those different departments. This isn't an easy topic, as you and I know. And, how much reading and thought and effort have we put in, because we're interested in the whole thing, to actually get to a point where we feel confident, as I described at the beginning, to be able to discuss things in this space. And so I think well, because we're building the plane as we're flying it and all those things, we're just going to have to deal with what's being asked of us not being perfect, the responses we give not being perfect. If you listen to any of the webinars that have been put out there for supporting suppliers to answer the tender requirements that are coming into force from April, then they're very good at saying, well, we don't expect it to be perfect, but we want you to at least show how you're thinking about going about it and to have some form of methodology that is defendable. And what I observe is that in doing that, it just makes us all sit down and go, oh, okay, well, how are we going to work it out? And how are we going to calculate it? And what is the thing that we're going to do to give them that answer for that particular requirement? And by just focusing in that way, it will move the needle. So that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, no, and it's very true. In our work with procurement departments, I mean, both at the private companies and also the healthcare systems, one advice we've often given is just ask for an LCA. Yes, they're all going to be different, and you'll get good LCAs and bad LCAs. But as a first step, that's a great place to start, and then we can refine from there and so on.
Yeah, we've got another problem as well, which is a sort of a challenge. Let's call it that, which is that obviously every healthcare system is in itself, an island, or even if it's not literally an island, right? So every country has its own emissions targets and its own way that it wants to go about reducing emissions in the world of healthcare, and they want reporting in that way. And I think this is one of the things that we need to really have a think about as time goes on, because the UK wants to know what are the emissions happening within the UK, and Spain wants to know what are the emissions happening within Spain, and this will continue as each health system starts to pick up. I understand there's about 60 health systems looking at the UK's NHS plan at the moment to see how they can implement it. So I don't have an answer to this, but I do see it as a challenge. We're being asked to say, well, here's our emissions from when if you manufacture in the UK, then okay, that's a thing. But lots of big global organizations, they manufacture in all sorts of places all around the world, and we're being asked to divvy up what we're doing, when actually as large organizations, we approach our efforts of emissions reductions in a holistic and global manner.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to do it as well, to be conscious of. This is a bit of a side topic, but I mean, for our own private consumerism, there's often a tendency, for instance, in Denmark, then where we will not calculate in all the CO2 emissions for a product that was produced in China, but then are bought in Denmark. And the truth is, if it weren't being bought in Denmark or the UK, it wouldn't have been produced in the first place. So, I mean, is it really fair to not be accountable? Probably not.
Yeah, and again, we're all learning as we go along, and so what seems to be the case is that people have got targets to hit, and then they'll make the ask help them hit the target. And I think that possibly this topic isn't quite like that. And as we go along, we will start to learn better ways of doing it. And I've always said, well, if you've committed to get to net zero by year Z, right, and you've had your journey there validated, then surely that's enough, right? Why are we even getting into the details of how of the specifics that are impacting country A, B, C, or D? And I don't have the answers to this, but I think about it a lot, and I'm like, which is the best way to go about this? Does it matter? Can we just do all of these things? Does one thing stop you doing another thing well? I don't know, but I feel like there's two things we need to do: keep it as simple as possible so that everyone understands what they've got to do, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, be positive and reward good behavior, not go, oh, well, that wasn't perfect, so you get a 0 score. And that sort of principle is what I think we need to just keep encouraging with whomever we're discussing this with in any different organization.
Yeah, definitely. And also another very interesting aspect of what you said, that you mentioned that upwards of 60 countries were looking to replicate what's being done in NHS in the UK, and that's one of the places where I see a gap as well, that for some parts of leadership there's still a tendency to play it down a little bit, like, okay, this is coming, but when is it really coming? And okay, now it's in a few markets, but and from what we're seeing, this is like a tsunami that's hitting. That it's true, it's been slow for so long.
Yeah, it's going to be a tsunami, and I think that, you know, it is tricky for you and I in the countries that we live in. You know, we're surrounded by this regularly. You know, if I turn on the television, on the BBC News, there'll be somebody talking about climate change, and as in the context of something that's just happened. Whereas I think in other nations that whole piece is not quite the same, and therefore the population isn't so in the same headspace, and they don't think about it in the same way. And this is one of the reasons that I go around talking about it so much, because I want to make it real for people. I want them to understand what we're talking about here. I want them to understand this isn't something that might happen. It isn't a fad. It isn't a new thing that the NHS is asking for just because it fancies doing something a bit different, or, you know, it's a big, huge thing that's coming like a steam train down the track at a faster rate of knots than anyone understands, and we don't really have time to mess about.
Yeah, and even just like, even if you didn't care about the planet at all, just from a purely commercial perspective, you're gonna be worse off in the tenders in a significant way. And of course, if you have close to a monopoly and is some kind of niche cancer treatment, you're the only one doing it, of course you will still be chosen. But most product areas are not like that. Most product areas have fierce competition, and you're fighting for every point in those tenders.
Yes, that's right. And from 10% being dedicated in marks for this, you know, what you're going to have to, if you haven't got your ducks in a row with regards to environmental sustainability, your answers and the way that you're going to respond to tenders and change your company's way it goes about things to be able to do that positively, then what you're actually going to have to do is sacrifice margin. And that's something that all business is, because in order to compete with another company who's getting their 10% full marks from that 10%, right, what have you got to do? Well, you've got to drop your price.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are things that I think as they start to happen, everyone will believe it. It's like the opposite of the Field of Dreams, isn't it? Build it and they will come. Have you seen that film? But if you haven't seen that film, they build a baseball field in a field of corn, and all of the old baseball stars come and play there. But they say if you build it, they'll come. But this is the opposite, right? Once everyone starts losing margin because they haven't, you know, in order to definitely win a tender, then they'll start to go, oh, well, maybe we should be doing some more stuff in this other world, this crazy world of environmental sustainability. I think we'll start to see that happening more and more. And also, as you've described, you know, when other countries start to do this, and it surely is a matter of time, only a matter of time, because I'm seeing on LinkedIn and Twitter and on the news, all these different countries with their new policies. You know, you're not allowed to build a car park in France unless you put a solar panel on the roof of it, right? You can't have any more new car parks, or you're not supposed to be flying anywhere. You're not allowed to fly if the journey's less than 3 hours long in France. You've got to get the train, right? These are things that are happening that make everybody know about them. So the healthcare systems surely are just, it's merely a matter of time until they follow.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the fact of the matter is as well that we can't really, if the whole world starts having healthcare systems like we've done it in the West, the planet is going to collapse. Because I mean, it's hardly sustainable for us in the first place for us right now. I mean, we're having a really hard time. NHS is this is as we're speaking a challenge right now, but NHS is far from alone. So there's something inherently unsustainable in that, where prevention is probably a key thing, but also just from the purely CO2 and economical standpoint, most Western countries spend something like 8-10% of GDP on healthcare, and if we're many countries are still at half that, but as they get richer, I mean, when you have roof over your head and food in your belly, one of the first things you really start to care about and spend money on is taking care of your health and the health of your family. And if they do it in the same way as we've done it, the planet is going to collapse.
Yes, well, yeah, I'm going to slightly correct you there, which is, when I think of this, I don't think the planet's been here forever, right? The planet's going to be just
good. Yeah,
fine.
I think I see where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the planet that we're trying to save. It's actually the human race. And it sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? But that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to keep our planet habitable for us and for the rest of nature, which we depend upon. And so, yeah, I mean, I did my own personal carbon footprint based on roughly what I do. Okay. And there's some sort of calculator that you can do that on. And it says, how many planets do you need to keep you in your lifestyle? And I really try hard. And guess how many planets I needed? 5.5. Right?
Yeah.
For me. And the point is that if everyone on the planet lived like me, it's just impossible. And so, somewhere in all of this, there's a huge question, isn't there? Which is, how are we going to really adapt as a population to what we have to do? How are we going to change our values? How are we going to define success? What will we be happy with? And that's a whole other podcast, probably, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we definitely need to do another one at one point, Michelle. But it's a great point you're having, and I've often brought this up as well, that Denmark is often touted as it's such a green nation doing amazing things, and yes, we have a lot of wind energy and whatnot, but we are spending as a nation 4 planets a year, which is so as soon as you start to looking at the consumption and also at how our agriculture is run, we are not a leading nation at all.
So we just have to keep exposing it, but also not in a defeatist manner, but in a just a reality manner, and try and work out how we're going to move forward in the correct way as fast as possible. And, we can see, can't we, over the last few years, real differences culturally. I mean, I wonder when we're going to get to the point where it'll be embarrassing to be driving a big, gas guzzling vehicle. You'll be ashamed of it, as opposed to, it being a status symbol. I don't think we're far off, are we?
No, and I think just that I've been working with sustainability for 10 years, started this company close to 8 years ago, and the change in that amount of time have been immense. I mean, when we went out to speaking with the multinational companies in the beginning, it was like, oh, yeah, we are sustainable. We have just talked to this one person who is our CSR department, and who did a report once a year, and that was it.
Yeah, things have moved a lot, even in last year, and I think this year, it'll be interesting, won't it, to see. I think there's going to be lots more extreme weather events. And the more extreme weather events happen, the more this becomes front and center and real, doesn't it? So I think that things will accelerate again massively this year.
I think so, and there are fortunately good people like you pushing and making it happen. It's been so wonderful to have you, Michelle, and I really love the practical insights that you're bringing, and especially from the commercial aspects. And I think it's quite sure that we need to do another podcast, definitely, because there's so much good stuff coming from you. But it was truly a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Hello, Joachim from Green Innovation Group here, back again. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation with Michelle. If you did, we are still on a quest to get more of you listeners to subscribe to this podcast. That makes it so that you don't miss any new episodes, and it becomes easier for us to get great people on the show. Really appreciate that, and really appreciate each and every one of you listening. Have a great day out there.